Hello friend, welcome back to my channel. How are you today? I hope you're doing well. It's Tim here, and in this video, I'm going to guide you through the steps to create this Halloween-inspired landscape painting. So this painting is inspired by all of the really cute ghost repaint paintings I've seen trending recently, so I wanted to do my own little twist on it, so I'm so excited to finally be able to share it with you. Upcoming here are the hex codes for the palette of colors that you'll need to be able to paint along with me, as well as the brushes. If you need the damp brush, I do have a video up on my channel on how to recreate the brush from scratch, so if you need it, definitely go check it out. The first step of our tutorial will be to screenshot this outline and insert it into a square size canvas on Procreate, and then trace over it in a blank layer so you'll have a guide to follow along with. Please feel free to take any breaks that you might need along the way, and when you're ready, let's begin. Alright, so to get into our tutorial, let's turn our trace layer down to about 10% opacity. Let's add a new layer and put it below the trace layer. Using the first color in the first row, let's fill our entire canvas in. Now let's add a new layer and switch over to using the soft airbrush, about 60% size and full opacity. Using the second color in the first row, starting from the upper left-hand side using loose, sweeping paint strokes, let's paint some of this color diagonally over top of the entire canvas, just like this. Now using the third color in the first row, and I'm going to increase my brush size here to about 100%, that way it's easier to make bigger lines with. And let's lay down a medium-sized stripe of this new color in the center of the painting, leaving a 2-inch margin on the top and the bottom that is unpainted. Then using the fourth color in the first row, let's place a line of this new color in the center of the painting, which should be just about the center of the color stripe we just laid down. Now using Gaussian blur, let's blur this layer to about 35%. Let's add a new layer and switch over to using the damp brush now, about 16% size and about 72% opacity. Using the fifth color in the first row, starting on the upper left-hand side again using loose diagonal paint strokes, let's lay down a layer of this new color over top the entire canvas. Now using the blending tool with the damp brush, using about 27% size and 34% opacity, using the same paint strokes, let's lightly blend this texture out, softening any harsh edges. Now let's turn the opacity of this layer down to about 12%. Now let's paint our stars. Let's add a new layer. Now switching over to using the paintbrush with the technical pen, about 51% size and full opacity. Using the fifth color in the second row, let's place different sized dots over the entire sky area of our trace outline. And you can place as many or as little as you'd like. And personally, I love the stars, so I'm going to put a lot in there. Next, let's make a copy of the star layer. Now using Gaussian blur, we're going to blur this layer to about 11%. Then let's make a second copy of this original layer, and using Gaussian blur again, let's blur this layer to about 14%. And then let's merge our star layers back together into one. Now that we have our stars, let's paint the moon. Let's add a new layer, using the sixth color in the second row, still using the technical pen now with full size and full opacity. Let's trace a circle over top of our moon on our outline, and it will definitely help you to turn the stability up on the technical pen a little bit. And to get a perfect circle, finish closing the circle shape and hold it down for a moment, and it will autocorrect to smooth the shape. And then you're going to tap the screen again with a second finger to make it a perfect circle, just like this. Then using this same color, let's fill this circle in. And now to add my favorite part, we're going to add the glow to our moon. Let's add a new layer using the soft airbrush, using full size and full opacity. And let's use the fifth color in the second row. Let's paint a smaller circle in the center of the moon. Then using Gaussian blur, let's blur this layer to about 52%. Let's add a new layer and repeat the same step, painting another circle in the center of the moon with the same color. Then, using Gaussian blur again, let's blur the second layer to about 37%. Now let's add a new layer and put it into overlay. Using the first color in the second row, the color white, let's paint a third smaller circle in the middle of the moon. Now using Gaussian blur, let's blur this layer to about 40%, which should give us the perfect glow for our moon. Now we're going to merge all of our painted layers back together into one, but be careful not to merge it into the trace outline. Now let's paint the trees. Let's add a new layer and switch over to using the water pen with the paintbrush. About 23% size and full opacity. Using the second color in the second row, let's paint a slightly diagonal line the entire length of the bottom edge of our trees. And for the trees here, we're going to be using up and down zigzag cross-hatching-ish paint strokes with the water pen, and then using the same paint strokes to blend it out with the blending tool. And after I have them blended here, you'll see me doubling the layer at the end to make them more opaque. So now using these paint strokes with the water pen, we're going to repeat this down the line for the trees, making sure to vary the height of our paint strokes too to make sure we get shorter and taller trees. And then we're going to fill in the space between the top of the trees and the bottom line. Now using the third color in the third row, let's shrink our brush size to about 18% and still full opacity. Let's place a thin line of this new color on the top row of our trees using the same paint strokes. Now with the fifth color in the third row, let's place a little bit of this lighter green color only underneath the moon area to create a nice little glow. Now let's switch over to the blending tool with the water pen, about 18% size and full opacity. Now using the same paint strokes as before, we're going to start with the top line and lightly blend out our colors together like this. When we reach the end of our row 2, we're going to go back and blend the middle. Then let's make a copy of this tree layer and merge the copy layer back into the original so it makes the color a little bit more opaque. Now we're going to go back in and add some smaller detail trees. Now still using the blending tool with the water pen, we're going to change the size of the brush to about 10% with full opacity. Now using the same paint strokes as before, along the upper line of our trees, we're going to use the smaller brush size and pull out some smaller trees on the edge down the entire canvas. When you're happy with your trees, I'm going to turn the opacity of this trace layer up a little bit so I can see it a little bit better against the dark colors. Which brings us to painting the ground. Let's add a new layer. Let's switch over to using the paintbrush with the soft airbrush now, using about 25% brush size with full opacity. Using the second color in the second row, let's outline the upper edge of the back hill area. And then using the same color, let's fill it in. Now using the third color in the second row, let's switch to the paintbrush with the damp brush, about 5% size and 49% opacity. Let's add a new layer. And now using our sad face highlight, which is a curved back and forth sweeping paint stroke, kind of in the shape of a sideways parentheses, but I think it looks like a sad face. Now using a light hand, let's lay some of this gray color over our back hill area. And then a little bit more just around the edge, just to outline it a little bit more. Then using the blending tool with the damp brush, about 9% size and 30% opacity. Using the same sweeping paint strokes as before, let's lightly blend it out. Then let's turn the opacity of this layer down to about 52%. Let's add a new layer, switching back to the paintbrush with the damp brush, about 3% size and 61% opacity, using the third color in the second row again. Using back and forth paint strokes along the trace outline, we're going to start painting our little pathway. When you're happy with your pathway, let's paint the front hill. Let's add a new layer and switch to the paintbrush with the soft airbrush, using around 50% brush size and full opacity. And using the fourth color in the second row, let's outline our front hill and then fill it in with the same color. Then I'm going to turn the opacity of this layer down to about 84%. Let's add a new layer and switch to the damp brush, about 8% size and 78% opacity. Using the third color in the third row, starting on either side, let's use our sad face highlights again and lay a wash of color over top of the ground, allowing just a little bit of that black color from underneath still to show through. For this case too, when laying your ground color down, I wouldn't lift your stylus up too much because lifting it up will reset the stamp pattern and make it more opaque looking, which is what we're actually trying to avoid. The damp brush is actually set to trail off a little bit the longer the single paint stroke goes, which will actually give you better blending capability to build up gradients really nicely. And I would kind of vary your hand pressure a little bit too. This will really help control the color a little bit better. So with this, I can show you that I'm painting this front area of grass in one long sweeping paint stroke back and forth, not really picking up my stylus too much at all, and just kind of letting it trail off at the ends to create shadows in the grass through a gradient effect. Then using the blending tool with the damp brush, about 8% size and 20% opacity, let's lightly blend it out. Then, when you're happy with your blending, let's add a new layer. Using the paintbrush again and the fifth color in the third row, using about 4% size and 67% opacity. Using the same paint strokes, let's lay down a little bit of this grass highlight color over top of the grass area. Then using the blending tool again, let's lightly blend it out like before. When you're happy with your blending, let's turn this layer's opacity down to about 75%. Now to paint the haunted house. Let's turn our trace layer off and let's make a copy canvas layer and put it on the top. And let's turn our trace outline back on. Let's add a new layer. Using the fourth color in the second row and switching back over to the technical pen. With full size and full opacity, let's outline the entire haunted house on the outline, closing it off on the bottom. And then using the same color black, let's fill the entire house in. Let's turn the house layer off, and now we're going to paint the windows. Now let's add a new layer and put it on the top of all the layers so it's easier to see. And using the sixth color in the second row, let's outline all of the windows and then fill each one of them in with the same yellow color. When you get your windows filled in, let's add a new layer and put that layer into overlay. Using the first color in the second row, the color white, let's place a little dot of color inside each one of the windows. Then using Gaussian blur, let's blur this layer to about 11%. Let's add a new layer and put our trace outline back on the top. On this new layer, using the fourth color in the second row, let's turn our brush size down to about 38% or so too, making it a little bit smaller. And we're going to outline each one of our windows. And it is okay to go a little bit over the edges too, because when we go to turn the house layer back on, it will hide the overlapping. Let's turn our house layer back on. Let's add a new layer. Now using the first color in the third row, we're going to switch over to using the water pen. Using about 7% size and full opacity, let's fill in both pumpkins on our outline. Now to paint the trees. Next, let's add a new layer. Switching over to using the water pen in the fourth color in the second row. Using about 14% brush size and full opacity, let's outline our top left tree branch like this. And then along the left edge of the canvas for the tree trunk. And then we're going to outline the right tree branches on the outline. Now let's switch to using the technical pen and outline our swing. Then we're going to outline the swing seat and fill it in. Next, let's paint the owls. Let's outline our owl shape on the outline, and we're going to color drop to fill them in with the same shade of black. Once you have your owls filled in, let's add a new layer and turn our owl layer off for a moment so it's easier to see. Now let's add a new layer, and using the technical pen with the fifth color in the second row, let's outline their eyes and fill them in. And then using the fourth color in the second row, let's give them pupils. And I'm going to turn the owl layer back on now. And I'm just going to clean up the edge here of the owl's eye just to make him a little bit more grumpy looking. Definitely my spirit animal. Now let's paint the ghosts. Let's start by adding a new layer and using the technical pen with the sixth color in the first row, the grayish lavender tinted white color, let's outline our first ghost just like this. And then using the same color, let's fill it in. And then we're going to repeat these same steps for the second ghost. Using the fourth color in the second row, the color black, and the technical pen, let's give our ghost some eyes. Then using the second color in the third row, let's outline the pumpkin and fill it in. Then using the first color in the third row, let's fill in the top area. Then using the fourth color in the second row, the color black, let's give it a handle and then outline the face of the pumpkin to give him a really cute little grin. I'm now going to take the ghost layer and put it back below the swing layer. Now using the technical pen with the eraser tool, on the layer with the swing and the trees, I'm going to erase the swing from in front of the ghost so that way it looks like the ghost is sitting on the swing rather than the swing being in front of him. And now we've reached our finishing details. Let's make a copy canvas layer and put it over the top, and then create a duplicate of it so there are going to be two of them. And then using hue and saturation, we're going to put the top layer into black and white. Let's add a new layer and put it into overlay. And let's add some highlights. Switching to the paintbrush and the damp brush, using about 7% size and 78% opacity. Using the first color in the second row, the color white. And using our sad face highlights again, let's add some highlight color onto our grass. Now let's add some highlight to the back hill area as well. Let's add a little bit to our ghosts. Now using the blending tool with the damp brush, about 12% size and 21% opacity, let's lightly buff and blend out all of our new highlights. Then, when you're happy with your blending, let's turn the opacity of this layer down to about 78%. Now let's add a new layer and put it into soft light. Now using the paintbrush with the soft airbrush with full size and full opacity, using the fourth color in the second row, the color black, let's paint a thin strip of color on the entire length of the left side, the bottom, and then the right hand side. And then using Gaussian blur, let's blur this layer to about 28%. Let's turn the opacity of this layer down to about 40%. And now I'm going to turn our black and white layer off. Now let's add a new layer. Still using the soft airbrush, about 62% size and full opacity. I'm going to repeat the same steps as before, creating an even thinner line on the left side, the bottom edge, and the right hand side again. And then using Gaussian blur, let's blur this layer to about 14%. And then we're going to turn the opacity of this layer down to about 27%, which will really give us a nice little vignette effect for our painting. Next, let's make a copy of our highlight layer and turn the copy layer down to about 24% or so, just to kind of brighten our highlights up a little bit. Now let's make another copy canvas layer, and then we're going to make a duplicate, so there are going to be two of them again. Now let's paint some grass textures. On the top of the two layers, let's switch to using the water pen with the blending tool, about 4% size and full opacity. With short, flicking paint strokes, we're going to start adding some grass texture to the bottom hill area, just like this. Kind of varying our paint strokes to the left and to the right here and there, making some smaller and some taller just to give a little bit more dimension, dragging the lighter and darker colors into each other. And I do find it helps to do it in rows as well, so that way all of the flicks look similar. And let's repeat the same on the right hand side. When you're happy with your grass, let's turn the opacity of this top layer we're working on to about 75% just to kind of soften it up a little bit. Then let's merge our two layers back together. Now using the water pen with the blending tool, about 3% size and full opacity, I'm going to add a little bit of detail to these background pumpkins using our background color in the ground and kind of drag it into the pumpkins to create little lines to make it look a little bit more realistic. Then let's give them stems. Last, let's add a new layer and put it into soft light. Now using the damp brush with about 5% size and 70% opacity, using the fourth color in the second row, let's put a little shadow color on our ghost just like this. And when you're happy with your shadow, let's turn this layer's opacity down to about 74% and we're done. Now let's sign our name. I wanted to thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this painting tutorial. It was so much fun to paint. Wishing you guys a fun and safe holiday season to come. If you would like to continue painting, I do have some more tutorials up on my channel, so definitely go check them out. And if you enjoyed this video and want to see more like this, I invite you to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video, friend. Happy painting!